Welcome, everyone. We today are talking about the commonalities across geographies with rancher-led networks. I'm Kelly Beavers. I'm going to be facilitating the panel today. I'm with the Nature Conservancy's North American Ag team, really focused on rancher networks as part of our regenerative grazing land strategy. And I am based in central Montana. Brett, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Kelly. Brett Riley. We ranch in southeast New Mexico and western Oklahoma. Uh, what's it been a little over a year ago, we started this little venture of ours in the southeast New Mexico producers group with Kelly. We were very, blessed to have the group from Montana with RSA come down and kind of get us kick-started. So yeah, happy to be here and look forward to the conversations. Thank you.
Brett. Angel and Martin, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and then we'll hear from Leo.
Sounds good. I'm Angel DeVries. I'm the executive director with the Rancher Stewardship Alliance, a rancher-led nonprofit in Montana.
And I'm Martin Townsend. I run RSA's conservation program.
Leo, we're missing out on you. You're going to have to unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Leo Barthelmess. I ranch with my brother in Malta, Montana, 50 miles from Canada. And I'm the president of the Rancher Stewardship Alliance. Thank you. Hi, Brett.
All right. Well, Brett kind of gave us a little bit of a preview, and you just heard Leo mention the Rancher Stewardship Alliance along with Angel and Martin. So why don't I start with you guys, Angel and Martin, and you can pass it to Leo when you want to, but why don't you introduce us to RSA? Give us some context. Who is RSA? What's your history, and why did you agree to go to New Mexico with me?
Let me start. Okay. Yeah, the Rancher Stewardship Alliance is a rancher-led nonprofit in north central Montana. We started about 21 years ago. It really was just a group of ranchers in South Phillips County, Leo being one of them, who were seeing a lot of outside pressures in our community and on the agriculture in our landscape, and just wanted a little bit more of a say at the table. They wanted a little bit more to be a part of the changes that were happening. And so this group of ranchers in South Phillips County just collaborated together, and they held, a lot of like neighborhood meetings, if you will. And throughout time, I'll let Leo give a lot more of the history, but throughout time, as RSA has grown and changed, we've developed into a ranching, conservation, and rural community organization. That's part of our mission. So what we do today is two major programs. We have our conservation program, which Martin will talk a little bit more about. And we have our education program, which just primarily focuses on anything that helps ranchers be more successful in the landscape, help understand the wildlife and the conservation impacts that are happening here, and anything just to keep agriculture going.
And then since 2017, we've operated a conservation committee and have grown to work on ranch infrastructure projects that have conservation, habitat, and other benefits to them. That committee consists of over 25 different conservation partners, and we find solutions to rancher needs that promote habitat, and we work with ranches across multiple different organizations and entities. So if we do a project with a ranch, we're often involving Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Bureau of Land Management, NRCS, or really whatever partner we feel is best suited to bring offerings to the table to help that ranch with their project needs and provide a conservation outcome. And so then, Leo, I don't if you wanted to give more background to the group.
Certainly, I can do that. I'll just briefly recap what Angel said. So back in 2020, some conservation groups moved into Phillips County, and we could see the ranching community could see some big changes coming in the future. And we had some meetings and decided we would like to participate in the changes rather than be victims of the changes. So, we formed a group, and with some facilitated meetings and some support from the Nature Conservancy to hire a facilitator, we held many, many meetings over 2 or 3 or 4 years before the RSA Rancher Stewardship Alliance actually came into fruition. But it was a as was about us learning what what the conservation community would like to see and how we fit in that role and how they can help us, do better work for ourselves and for the conservation community. So that's basically how we started, and hundreds of hours of meetings later, we are here. Thank you.
When you guys got started, were there other organizations that you looked to for that, or were you out completely on your own? Were there other organizations from other parts of the country that were at all helpful in your beginning?
We were on our own. It was our problem. Nobody, how the old thing goes. It's not a problem till it's in your backyard, and it was in our backyard. And so no, we basically were on our own, and a few leaders in the community. I was a latecomer, so I don't qualify quite there, but recognized and made some steps to start RSA through the facilitated meetings, and I joined shortly after the beginning. But
Leo,
yeah.
I think Kelly is maybe referring to the period of time when several of you South Phillips County ranchers visited the Malpai Borderlands and the Sandhills Task Force and the Blackfoot Challenge. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that period of time.
Certainly. That was after we started having a few facilitated meetings and decided to formally became a nonprofit. And in order to do it correctly, we reached out to other nonprofits that had a lot of rancher participants and to learn how the conservation community and the ranching community work together in those locations. And we very much liked what we saw. We went to the Malpai Borderlands group, the Blackfoot Challenge, Nebraska Sandhills Task Force, and we identified a new way to live within our geographic area. And we adopted those practices and have been supported by those organizations for many, many years. So, yeah, no, but when we started, we were on our own.
I love that. Well, that sounds, although it was, 21 years ago, that sounds quite similar. I heard you say that, well, Angel said, we're just a group of ranchers. And I want to call that out because anyone watching this and everyone in person is going to be like, we're just ranchers. But that's in fact why all of you are on this panel. So I just want to call out the just piece. That's really the strength. But also I heard both of you say that this was really a way to have a say at the table and to participate in the change that was coming and that was already happening. And Brett, I want to hand it over to you to introduce the Southeast New Mexico Producers Group, kind of some of those challenges and opportunities and why the time was now. Because I know I've heard you say we want to have a say at the table and we want to participate in change. So that seems like a common thread.
Right. Yeah, Kelly. Thank you. Yeah, I think, and I'll back up just a little bit as to why I felt like it was so important for us to put a group together. We've been a part of, Lesser Prairie Chicken, it plays a big role down in our part of the world in our ranching activities. And so we'd been a part of a lot of, Fish and Wildlife Service meetings, BLM meetings, State Land Office meetings, every agency in the world meetings. But we would go to these meetings and there would be one or two producers and 30 agency folks. So what we felt like we needed to do was to, engage our producers more in, the activities that were basically controlling their livelihood. So, we searched around a little, did a little probing, was fortunate enough to, be able to get a hold of Kelly, and she was amazing to be able to put, RSA together, bring that trip down to our part of the world. Opportunities, bringing RSA down. I think, the fact that they were so willing to come down as a group, and I can't remember how many of y'all there were, but there were, 5, 6, 7? There was a bunch. 4? I thought there were more than 4. 5. Okay. Anyway, it seemed like a bunch, and it was very well received when y'all got there. The challenges we had. Again, it was just getting producers to the table, right? I mean, that's the tough part. I mean, as Leo alluded to, back when they started, they had a challenge there. They saw, folks coming in and the threat of conversion and those, ranching families and producers not being able to, have the same opportunities that they had in the past. And so, new challenges. So, I don't know that we had the conversion problem. We don't live in quite as pretty a country as y'all to go north, as you know, when you came down and saw us. I mean, it has its own allure and really good ranching country, but we certainly have been challenged by, endangered species and, just, climate changes and all the different things that we as producers face, marketing challenges, all those different things. And it's just really nice. And I think our, probably, I don't want to get over my skis, but, we really, our producers got a lot of value out of the folks from Montana coming down and visiting with us. So.
Well, thanks, Brett. I mean, I think I heard both of you say that ultimately we wanted to keep our ranching communities connected and have an opportunity for the next generation on the land. And even though your threats were maybe a little bit different, it's that kind of goal that was common. And you just started talking about the time coming down. So that's really what we want to spend most of this time on, is just giving all of you watching or listening the opportunity to see what this really looked like in person. So like Brett said, as their group in Southeast New Mexico wanted to get formed, there was a lot of common things that they were asking for or curious about that I saw existing up in Montana. And so Angel, Martin, Leo, and I, also one of their other board members, Amber Smith, and then Callie Bierman from University of Wyoming. We all went down together to Lubbock, Texas, and then drove across to New Mexico. So we, got in town, had, customary margaritas, and then we met, the five of us or six of us met Brett and his folks, all the producers that he gathered together at a rest stop across from a BLM ACEC near Brett's ranch. So Angel, Martin, Leo, what were your first impressions? And then Brett, I'd love to hear your reflection on what you and some of your neighbors and other people from your community thought of us from up north.
Sure, I can start. So we went down in February. For reference, when we left, it was, I don't know, 40 below and wonderful outside.
Windy here.
So we went to the southern end of the country and sweat to death. And my first impression was we got out and I was amazed how many people were wearing coats and vests.
Yeah, and I'd say my first impression is just I've never been in a landscape that looked quite like that. It's definitely different when you think about what is actually growing on the ground and what's happening on the ground. But later we'll talk more about, you realize that there are so many commonalities in the challenges that we're facing. But definitely thought it was different and wondered how on earth are we supposed to help anyone down here?
I would echo Martin and Angel's comments. The landscape is entirely different. The weather's entirely different, but there was 28 ranchers, I think, in that circle of friends that we met that morning in about 10-15 minutes. And the commonality is dusty pickups, fencing pliers, and gloves. And it was just like being home in my favorite spot, being in a rancher's pickup, driving around talking about their cows and their ranches. It was great.
Brett, what'd you think of us as we blew in from the north? What did your neighbors think of us? Were they still?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, you were very well received. I mean, obviously from the beginning, I was very appreciative of, folks taking their time, away from their operations. I know that's tough to do, especially that time of year. So we were very appreciative of the fact that y'all took the time to come down and visit with us. But I think what really got our group off to a good start was the fact that you guys were there. There was a tremendous amount of value in talking to the producers that were there from New Mexico after the trip. There's a tremendous amount of value in the fact that, they met with, other producers, right? They weren't just agency folks that are coming out and telling you how to do something. They were folks that actually had been on the ground, had shared some of the similar struggles and, successes that we had, like Angel and Martin and Leo all said, we all, might be different landscapes, but we all go about things pretty similarly. And knowing that there are folks in other parts of the world that share those challenges and have different challenges, but just that commonality that yeah, there are, they might be, on the other side of the continent from us, or not the continent from the United States from us, but they still have, we can still sit in a pickup and ride across a bumpy road and talk about the things that we have in common. The landscapes are different, certainly. Our landscapes, you can go from one side of our, producer area to the other, and they're totally different, from the sand sage, which y'all got to see. And we got over and saw a little bit, I guess, the next day, some of that country in the mountains over there on BA's country. But, you go farther southwest, you get into, maybe a little rockier, a little bit rougher kind of country. And so, yeah, the similarity that we had together, those conversations in those pickups driving around and that night and the next day, I don't think you can't put a value on that, because where else are you going to get those? I mean, you can go to a meeting somewhere, you can go to a gathering somewhere, and it's, yeah, you'll have some of those conversations, but they're not like the ones bouncing out across the ranches. Those have so much value that I just can't, you can't put a value on that, because just sharing, knowing that you're not alone, right? We all get to think,
Yeah.
we all get segmented down in our parts of the world, and we think, man, this challenge, they're just beating me to death with this or this or this, and I'm alone. But knowing that folks, 2,000 miles away have the same challenges, I think had a lot of input and a lot of, I keep saying the word value, but it's true. I mean, our producers got a lot out of that meeting. So, and really kickstarted our group. I will say that if it wouldn't have been for y'all coming down, I don't know how we would have got these folks to the table.
Hmm.
But the fact that y'all came down, you showed the interest, they saw that you guys are doing it, and you're just like we are in a different part of the world, made them understand that, hey, there is something to this. So yeah.
Hmm. Well, I think that hook, right? I know you had tried to gather ranchers in your community before and had varying success or challenge with people actually showing up, because, why do you want to show up to see your neighbor from one county over? But when you've got the hot ticket of Leo Barthmas coming down, of course everyone wants to show up. But Brett, why don't you walk us through what we did that day? Give people who are listening to this an idea of what the day looked like. And then I'd love for those from RSA to reflect on different memories that they had from the day, whether it was out in the field, we saw a couple different ranches, looked at some different things, or at supper.
Yeah, I'll try, Kelly. It's been a year, or not quite a year, but I've probably been kicked in the head twice since then, so I'll do my best. But yeah, we met that morning at the rest area there, which is just on the south side of the ranch, kind of right in the middle of our properties. And then we went along the highway, best I remembered, stopped in an area there along the road that was, I wanted everyone to see, because it was an area where they had done some shinnery, which is shinnery oak, which is it's a component in lesser prairie chicken habitat, but we're getting to have too much of it. It's getting to be, it's taking over a lot of our country. And I wanted to show that, that treatment had been done like 25 years ago, and you could still see that line, between where they had, sprayed that shinnery and where they hadn't. And just to give the folks a little bit of an idea as far as what our challenges are in our part of the world, where we start dealing with, like this shinnery deal and how it's become a monoculture in some places. And then we went on down the road. I think if I remember right, we went to the west side of the ranch and looked at a pasture that I wanted to kind of show that, that pasture probably has the most, we've got I don't know if I want to call it an invasive grass. We've got an opportunistic grass in our country called layman's love grass, that a lot of folks and agencies really don't like. And there's even been talk of trying to spray it and get rid of it, which I think is crazy. But I just wanted to show how, that time of year, it was greened up, I believe, when y'all were there a little bit, and those cattle were hitting it pretty hard. And so I guess I wanted to kind of show that the value maybe of ranching down in our part of the world versus y'all's, where y'all had to go home and hook on the hay wagon again and feed hay. There's certainly good parts to being down in our part of the world, just like there's good parts to being in your part of the world. But I tried to show a little bit of the differences maybe that we have down, and some of the attributes that we have down in our part of the world. I believe after that we went to a place where the BLM had just conducted a prescribed burn. As I told the group, I'm pretty much on the fence on that deal. Well, I'm not really on the fence. I'm not real big on just landscape wide burns. I think spot burns are a very useful tool, but in our country, you have to be really, really careful on those big prescribed burns. As a matter of fact, just an update for y'all. we had a really dry summer until the end of August, and then we received 4.5 inches of rain and one rain overnight. And then we went along for about 2 weeks, or no, for 2 months, and then about a week ago we had another 5 inches in 2 days. So we've had two rain events this year, and that area where they burned, it's way behind those areas that weren't burned, and so it's a challenge down in our part of the world where we're limited by precipitation. So yeah, just showing them that and seeing what the differences are. We had some really good conversations there, standing on the side of the road, I thought. Then we proceeded to, I guess we went to lunch at the house, ate lunch, and then we ran up to Bryce's place and looked at, he had the events collars put on, and it was interesting, looking and hearing about his challenges and talking to Leo, who was one of the first ones in the country to put those collars on several years ago. So that was a really good conversation. And then I guess from there, we went back and then we got back together that evening at our meeting there in town, from what I remember, and had, I felt like a very good meal, and brought some more producers in that couldn't come during the day, and really had a lot of really good conversations. The next day we went out west and went to BA's place that morning and looked at his operation, which is a little different for our part of the world. He's more intense as far as, he runs a little feedlot there, not a little, pretty good sized feedlot there, and tries to background some cattle, and then also tries to utilize some pulling his cows in at certain times of the year and feeding them, and just it's interesting to see the different types of operations, right? I mean, he'll pull cows in and feed them 4 or 5 months out of the year, and if I don't ever feed a cow a blade of grass unless we have them in the lot weaning calves or something like that. So it's just, even within our area, right, there's different types of operations. So it was interesting to get everybody's input and to see, the diversity, and also, I'll be interested to hear what the folks from Montana have to say. So I'll let them talk.
Thanks, Brett. I think it was wonderful because although we had folks from Montana down, you were really showing different operations in your community, right? And most of the people there were ranchers within kind of a few counties in your community, getting to see their neighbor. And there was a lot of tailgate time. At each one of those stops, we had a lot of time for visiting. So Leo, what were some of the things that you remember from that day, or some of the conversations that you had at those different stops as we were looking at different management styles or different tools that were being utilized, and really looking at different operations and different grazing systems?
So I super enjoyed the hospitality of the ranchers there. And, I'd fall out of a pickup and what's that? What's this? How does this work? Because it's so foreign to what we get to live with here in Montana. I was just had hundreds of questions and talked in the pickup with the producer, and it was all super great. And what the thing I took home is Brett's country is so much different than ours, and the innovation and versatility and tenaciousness of each rancher to figure out his own space and his own place. I was super impressed. I mean, because I looked at some of their challenges and I thought, no way I could do this, but they're doing it. So, but it was great. I enjoyed seeing the burn. I enjoyed seeing the chinnery. I enjoyed BA's place. The diversity from end to end of the tour was really helpful for me to understand their situation. It was just amazing, the different strategies they use, the supplementation of the cows in the winter. It was warm, when we were down there, compared to Phillips County, and it wasn't 40 below, it was like 50 or 60 above, but the cows still had to be supplemented like our cows. So it was interesting how everything played and how it was so much different. But I really enjoyed visiting with the people and understanding their lifestyle and their situation and their challenges. At the end of the day, we take care of our land, our families, and our livestock. So it was great.
Yeah, what a good common thread. Brett, or sorry, Martin and Angel, when we were out there, when we were making the different stops, what were some of the things that you remember about the day together, or maybe some surprises that you are reflecting on even now, almost a year later?
So Leo kind of touched on it, but seeing the diversity. So I have a range background, and then I've made a career of working around sportsmen's groups and enjoy hunting. So I was having fun seeing all the different wildlife and different plants. I got to see quail for the first time in my life, and I wandered away from the group to go chase quail a bunch of times to see how far they actually fly when they jump up. I got to learn what a cholla cactus was. Those things are cool. I stole a stick from a dead one, and it's in my office now. Got to see mesquite for the first time. Saw a bunch of antelope, a bunch of deer, walnut trees. I guess I didn't even consider that a walnut tree was a real tree. So I got to see those. So it was super cool to see the landscape. And then it was really, really interesting that I guess like socially, the setting was the same. It was the same sort of rural area that we live in. It was the same sort of disconnect from where problems come from that we face. It was just the same place, just with a different temperature and a different location.
Yeah, I'd echo all the things that Martin and Leo said so far, and I'd probably just add that I was also surprised at the similarities. I was really surprised when I went down there. I looked a lot at like the people that we visited with and how they were adapting and responding to the changes and the challenges that they were facing, and just realizing so many of the parallelisms between the people in our landscape here. So I looked at it really from a people standpoint, and seeing that like folks who work in agriculture tend to be able to have this personality where they're like, okay, this is a challenge, and this is what I'm facing, and how am I going to get through it? And that tenacity that comes through when you work in ag was really surprising. Not that I expected any different, being in a different landscape, but it was really neat to see that even though our landscapes are totally different and our ecosystems and environments can be really different, that the tenacity and drive to solve problems is really the same within the group, within the people.
Mm. Well, I think that's a really good reflection. Brett, I know you mentioned earlier that that this group, coming down from Montana was really the crux. So can you tell us a little bit about how people in your community engage differently? Like, did different people show up than normally had shown up when you tried to do this before? What did that look like? And then let us know, in all these months since then, like Leo and Angel said, this takes a lot of time. I think Leo said meetings and meetings and meetings and meetings. And so I'd love to hear, as an update for us, first kind of tell everyone how this was different in terms of who showed up and how they engaged. And then give us an update. Where are things now on the slow progress of building trust and creating your own group?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, I think, I'll touch on the first one. How was this gathering or meeting different than what we'd had in the past? I think we had more producers there that we would have a really hard time getting to a meeting that was an agency type meeting. That was just going to be kind of, spouting out the same information that they might have heard 3 or 4 times. And I'll go back and preface that with the fact that, all of these folks are busy, right? I mean, the way things have gotten with economies of scale, and, we've all gotten bigger, and, my grandparents made a heck of a living on 150 cows, and I couldn't even, hardly keep the lights on with 150 cows, but, it's tough. I mean, and so everybody's scattered out more. There's more demands on their time. So as we start talking about getting them together and asking them for some of their time, there has to be some value there, right? And so I think the value in this situation was the fact that we did have the folks down from Montana. We did have, fellow ranchers there to share stories with, and folks that had bounced around for a million miles in those pickups just like we had. I think that was the main crux of being able to get some of those people there that I had not been able to get to a meeting before. I mean, there were 10 or 15 of those guys that are diehard ranchers that are dang sure as good a hands as there is, that you just have a hard time getting them to a meeting, right? I mean, they're busy, and when they're done with the day, they're tired and they want to spend a little time with their family. And so we all know the challenges there. And so, getting them there and having them see that, this is what can come out of these meetings if we do it right. I think that was a real value for us. And then to carry on as to what's happened since then, we've met, I don't know how many times, 6, 7 times now. And it's, every time, of course you won't have everybody every time, but we've had some really good meetings. A lot of people, we're starting to go to Zoom now, which I think will help us a bunch, to get folks, even if they can, because, it's, from my house to the other side of the area is probably 3.5 hours. So, I mean, there's some distances there. So it's tough for everybody to get there. A little side note on that, as far as what we're doing, we're actually finishing up a NIFWIF grant right now that's going to center around a bunch of monitoring. And we've got quite a few of the producers that well, pretty much every producer that's going to be involved in the grant was there at that meeting. And probably 70% of them have never been involved in a grant before. So I think that's a big step, getting those folks to understand the value of, what we're trying to talk to them about, conservation and, regenerative grazing, that type thing. And so, yeah, I think there's just so many different applications of having a fellow rancher on the ground with you. Again, I mean, I can't overstate this enough. It just means everything to me as far as getting those, that segment of the population out there. And I'm sure y'all have them up in your country too, that, there's, you try to go talk to them and they're good ranchers, right? And they're really good producers and they're, good at what they do. And you try to go talk to them about this kind of stuff and they just don't see the value in it. I mean, that's the end of the story. But having, being able to bring this aspect to the table and having these fellow producers there, to me, was what allowed us to bring a lot of those folks to the table. And we've got a lot more folks that are asking questions right now, right? That didn't ask them before they, you know how we are. We're a community. Everybody, works with everybody else. You wean, you ship, you brand together, everybody talks, when you're having lunch, and those folks that were there are able to sit there and talk to those folks that haven't been involved yet and say, hey, this might be all right deal. We're going to be able to do this and this and this, and how word of mouth spreads these things. But it's a positive, I guess that's what I'll end with. It's a positive experience for those folks that were there. And so many of these meetings that we had in the past were not positive experiences. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I either left a meeting or I left a conference or something like that. And I'd get on the phone with my wife and I'd tell her, dang, I just wasted 2 days of my life. I could have been at home doing this, this, and this, and you feel that way. But I certainly did not feel that way, with this meeting that we had with RSA. It would be, 180% the other direction. I couldn't be more excited about having them down, and we're looking forward. Kelly and I talked about maybe having our group travel a little this next year, and I know those folks are certainly looking forward to that and getting out and seeing some other folks' country. So yeah, I just, you can't put, I don't know, it's hard to quantify what it meant to us, but what I would say is it got folks at the table that I didn't know if we could ever get at the table. And then past that, not only did we get them to the table, but they're actively working with us now, like I said, on this next grant we're going to put in. So yeah, they're starting to see the real attributes of being involved in a group like this. So, and I will say one more thing. We're individualists. I mean, everybody on this panel knows that. I mean, trying to get a bunch of ranchers to do something together sometimes is like herding cats. I mean, they just do not. We just want to kind of do our own thing and be left alone and, live out in the middle of nowhere. And so that's a challenge right off the bat, right? But this allows us to, at least if we do think about going and doing something, we're doing with like-minded people, I guess is the way I would put it. So yeah, great deal.
Thanks for that, Brett. And I know you and I have been in touch over the last year. And so just hearing how your group has narrowed in on some goals or things that they agree on, like the monitoring, like working to improve FSA relationships in the area, like really thinking about brush management. I love that that those are coming from the people in that community, right? It's people deciding what's that 80% we agree on. And then like you said, it's hard then to sit down and say, oh, do we be an LLC or do we be a B Corp or do we be a co-op and eventually get there? But you're right on your way to your hundreds of meetings that Leo talked about with 7 or 8 under your belt. Leo, Angel, Martin, it's been a little while since you've been down there and you were seeing a group that was at a life cycle that's way in your past. So can you just give me some insight on kind of the encouragement you're feeling from that trip and maybe it's just the pay it forward. There were groups that did that for you and kind of what you're thinking this far along after the trip.
I guess I could start a little bit here. So I'm really encouraged to hear what Brett just said, and it reminds me so much of our early history in the Rancher Stewardship Alliance. A few interested people went to the first meetings, and the word spread through brandings and shippings, and that maybe there's an opportunity here where there is some value, as Brett said. And it's just like, I guess maybe the words deja vu, just to live my past, because it's exactly the same story. And I'm so glad there's some success. And, we walked away, maybe we wasted our time, but, we enjoyed the great trip, met some great people, but it's a big step to go from 0 to 60, like Brett's group is doing. I mean, that's a big commitment in time and effort. And I'm so glad to see they're following through and having some success, because it'll just exponentially grow now with committed individuals. It was great. Thank you, Brett.
Yeah, I think I'll add that one thing that really struck me about what you said, Brett, is that we're individualists, which is very true for people in agriculture, especially when you're working your own business and operation. You don't producers don't get an opportunity necessarily to collaborate or to build a community quite like that as much. And I think these local landowner-led groups are changing that narrative. We're changing the way we do agriculture, and I think that's hopefully what is inspiring you. I mean, I'm still inspired by it every day, just realizing that none of us or none of these individual producers could do it on our own. But the fact that we were able to, build an organization, and yes, it has its very specific structure, but what it does is it creates the power of community, and it creates an ability to do more with less resources, at least on an individual basis. And I think it has the potential for more impact, more positive impact in what's happening both in our individual lives as producers and our, agriculture industry as a whole, and conservation and our rural communities. I think that's one thing that I still see every day. We still see people who are producers who are rather individualistic, and they're starting to say, well, what's RSA doing and what are they doing? And softening their approach to the way we work together.
I love the pickup I was in, because they were asking me 1,000 questions about what I do. And I was trying to explain what I do, and I was boiling it down to that it's just my job to be professionally friendly between all the ranches we work with, all the agency partners we work with, and that's it. My job is to be professionally friendly. And they looked at me like I was insane. And they said, it's okay. So how does that work? I was like, well, this year I'm going to try to turn that into a couple $1 million. And then that, I think, made it even worse. So trying to explain that basically when we're adding projects together across ranches, when we're adding in partners to that, when we're adding in support for that, and we're adding just involvement around that it brings more people together, which in turn brings forward more resources. You can see it both make sense and completely bamboozle the people I was in the pickup with about how that is working and shouldn't work, but could work. And so I think that was a fun path on that whole trip.
Yeah.
I love that, kind of the art of the possible. And I'd imagine that is overwhelming when you're just 20 ranchers in the room thinking about what this looks like, all the way to RSA, having a staff of multiple people and a board and committees. But it's that first little group, right, that meets kind of as a board and starts to think about the future, that eventually becomes a full board and committees and staff. Well, I think we're going to wrap up soon. And, but I do want to just ask Angel and then Brett to reflect on, so you met in person in February. We shared some good food, a lot of dusty pickup hours. But you two have stayed in touch, and there are kind of some ability that to continue to learn from each other, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe touch on your time together in person in September again?
Yeah, we thankfully there's a group that Kelly is facilitating on a monthly basis that meets virtually. It's any sort of landowner collaborative or landowner based group that is getting together, and that's how we're kind of just sharing knowledge across one another. But then of course we got to Brett and I got to see each other at a conference where we tagged on an in-person gathering of this rancher collaborative group in Spearfish, South Dakota. So it's given us a chance to reconnect and say like, hey, how are things going? What are you still struggling with? At least it's a good check-in, and it helps keep maybe any despair at bay if things are getting really hard or it's hard to get over this next challenge or this next hurdle. Being able to talk to other groups who have been across the bridge, who have crossed the mountain or, hit the summit, it makes it a lot easier to go through it, or just to be able to have a network and a resource to ask questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think Angel hit it on the head there. I mean, it's very it has a lot of, again, value. Again, I use that word, but to have someone that you can reach out to, that you've shared, we've met a couple of times in person. It's, on Zoom meetings quite a few times, and knowing who that person is and what that group is. And, as you come to, crossroads and decisions that you have to make within your own group, knowing that you can have that asset, right? That there is someone in another group that you can call up on the phone or send an email or text to and say, hey, how did y'all handle this? Did you see this one coming? I mean, it's a little more difficult being that, we're kind of the new kid in town and RSA is kind of the gold standard, so we're kind of behind it a long ways, but just knowing that those relationships are there and that you can pull on them, I think is, again, adds so much to just this conversation and having the two groups having met, right, and having that direct exposure. I don't think you can. I don't know of any other way to do it. I mean, we live in the times of Zoom calls and emails and all that kind of stuff, and it's great because it saves a lot of time, right? And at times it's very beneficial, but there's nothing like getting out of a pickup, shaking somebody's hand, and visiting about, how are things going? How's your family? What's the cattle market doing in your part of the world? What's, just all those things that we're familiar with and that we all have that commonality, right? And I think that's the real, asset to this is having that. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and she's going to try and cut me off probably, but I'm going to mention that none of this would have happened without Miss Kelly. I mean, she's been amazing. Has gone over and above what her job description is to make sure that we do this. And I'm sure she does it with other groups too. It's not just us. And so, I just want you to know, Kelly, that, from our perspective, you've done so much to help us. And I know it's your job, but, people do their jobs, but when they put their heart in it like you do and really believe in it, it makes a difference. It really does. So thank you for doing that. And I'm sure RSA would be right on that bandwagon with me. So I just want to make sure that you get the credit. I mean, we're talking about, Southeast New Mexico and RSA, which we should, but we certainly don't want to leave out your role in what we've done and how it was so key in getting it all put together and how it continues today. You're the glue that keeps us together. So thank you for doing that.
I'll echo that. I don't think I've ever seen how someone herd cats as well as Kelly Beavers, because that's what this job very much entails, is trying to get us all on the same page and together and to talk about the things that we need to talk about. And I would echo everything Brett said.
I would totally agree, Kelly. Yeah, couldn't do it without you.
You guys are very sweet. Luckily this is on a Zoom, so my blushing is from a distance. In person, this will be more awkward, but I just really appreciate all of you. And I think for those of you who are watching this that are either in leadership at a rancher-led collaborative, you work for one, or maybe you're on the board, know that the invitation to become a part of this informal sort of gathering of the groups is available to you. We meet monthly virtually. In January, we have a 2-hour deep dive focused on kind of financial metrics. So Thunder Basin Prairie Grassland Ecosystem Association, it's a long one, to Bugpea, who's been around 25, almost 30 years, Sandhills Task Force, RSA. There's a lot of groups that have really fine-tuned what are those metrics that they're showing to their board? How are they really showing the health of the organization over time? And what are they tracking? And we all have our own ways of trying to do that, but we're really gonna, I think a lot of the time this group is almost sharing cheat codes, something that might take an organization 5 or 10 years to come around to. And maybe even an organization's been around for 20 years, but there's something they can learn from another group. And so that's what we're going to dive into in January. But really, this is just a time to realize that although all of the organizations, both that presented today from the Southeast New Mexico Producer Group to RSA, they're super place-based. And it's the individual ranchers in those communities who volunteer their time on the board, who add their expertise to committees, that really make them successful, make them special, make them durable. That is true. And also the challenges that are being faced around rising land values, around changing climate, around aging population on the land. None of those things are specific to place. And so I hope those of you watching felt inspired today to realize that, as Brett said at the very beginning, you're not alone. And also that there are other groups that have done this. I love Leo's reflection that it's almost like deja vu. He's remembering back to when their organization was there. And so this is your invitation, if you're watching, to reach out to RSA or to Southeast New Mexico Producer Group, or also to reach out to me, to the Nature Conservancy, and become a part of this gathering where, like Angel said, I'm just herding cats, but a lot of the learning is the peer groups being peers to each other, and knowing that although we are very place-based, our challenges are rarely place-specific. And also that if you've got ranchers in your community that are interested in getting together, that there are models, there are other organizations out there that you can follow, and that it does work. It just takes several thousands of meetings to get there. So, any last words from any of you before we wrap up?
No, I'm just going to say right quick. I mean, I know this is our recording. I'm really looking forward to, December in Tucson, that we can all get together again and give us a chance to catch up and visit and present in person. I think that'll even bring a little bit more of a lively conversation. So looking forward to that and looking forward to seeing all you guys then.